We love to think of the stock market as this cold, calculating machine, right? All charts, algorithms, and, rational decisions. But what if that's not the whole story? What if, deep down, it's just a giant mirror reflecting our own human psychology? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the two emotions that really build and break the markets.
So let's just start with the big question right out of the gate. If the markets were purely logical, just based on company value and economic data, why do we see these absolutely wild swings, these dizzying highs and these soul-crushing crashes? The short answer? It's not rational, not even close.
Because underneath all the spreadsheets and the expert analysis, the market is really just millions of people making millions of decisions. And those decisions, they are driven by two of the most powerful, most primal forces in our nature. These are the real architects of market behavior.
And here they are: greed and fear. Seriously, think of them like two giants in a constant tug-of-war for control of the market. Greed, that's the engine of optimism. It's the voice that whispers, "Go for it," pushing us to take huge risks for even bigger gains. And then there's fear. Fear is the emergency brake. It's the voice of caution screaming at us to protect what we've got and to avoid loss at all costs. To really get how they work, we've got to look at them one by one. So let's start with the more seductive of the two.
Okay, first up, the intoxicating allure of greed. This is the force that fuels those massive bull markets, right? It creates the legendary stories of overnight millionaires and makes everyday people feel totally invincible. But what does greed actually look like when we're talking about the market?
Well, in the market, greed isn't just, wanting to make a bit more money. Oh no, it's an emotional state where that desire for massive returns gets so powerful, so overwhelming that it completely blinds you to any rational sense of risk. It's that feeling that the sky is the limit, and if you don't get in right now, you are going to be left behind forever.
And the behaviors, they are so easy to spot once you know what to look for. Greed shows up as FOMO, that intense, gut-wrenching anxiety you get watching a stock just rocket to the moon without you. It makes people chase hot tips without a second of research. People start to just ignore obvious warning signs like insane valuations because they're all caught up in that classic, incredibly dangerous phrase, "This time it's different." And it all builds up to this state of pure market euphoria where caution just gets tossed right out the window.
But as we all know, what goes up, especially when it's driven by greed, eventually has to face its polar opposite. So let's meet the second architect: fear.
Market fear, it's that cold, sharp pit in your stomach feeling you get when you're about to lose money or you already are. Now, this is a powerful survival instinct. It's wired into us. But in investing, it just short-circuits our logic. It triggers that flight response, and it leads to decisions that are hasty, panicked, and almost always irrational.
And when fear is in charge, the signs are just as obvious as with greed. It kicks off with panic selling, people dumping perfectly good stocks just because the price is dropping and everyone else is selling. You see this massive herd-like rush into so-called safe assets, like bonds or gold. Every single piece of news, even good news, gets twisted into something negative. And this belief starts to set in that the market is just going to fall forever. For some people, it leads to total paralysis. They're just too terrified to buy or sell anything at all.
Okay, so here's the key. These two forces, they're not just random events. They are locked in this predictable dance, this emotional pendulum that just swings back and forth over and over again. And that swing, that's what creates the cycles of boom and bust that we see in the markets.
So let's actually trace that pendulum swing. It always starts quietly, with a little optimism, as a recovery gets going. Then, that optimism catches fire, and it explodes into full-blown euphoria. This is peak greed, and it's also the point of maximum financial risk. Then, right at the top, a little anxiety creeps in. The market stumbles. This is immediately followed by denial, where people just refuse to believe the party's over. But denial never lasts, and it gives way to pure panic. Now fear is in the driver's seat. And finally, we hit rock bottom: capitulation. This is when everyone throws in the towel. They just give up. And the incredible irony is that this is the point of maximum financial opportunity. And it's where the whole cycle gets ready to start all over again.
So the most important thing to get is this: the two are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. Every single bubble, inflated by greed, is basically planting the seeds of its own destruction. And every crash, caused by that overwhelming fear, eventually creates those bargain basement prices, that pessimism, from which a whole new way of optimism and greed is born.
So that's the market's emotional blueprint. But here's where it gets really personal. What does all this mean for you? Because these architects, fear and greed, they aren't just building the market. They are trying to build your financial decisions too.
I mean, Warren Buffett absolutely nailed it with this one. And just think about it for a second. What is impatience, really? It's just another name for greed screaming for quick riches or fear demanding an immediate escape from the pain. And the antidote to both of them is patience. It's having the ability to manage those emotions, to act with your brain when everyone else is acting with their gut. That's how real wealth is built over time.
And this might be the single most important takeaway from all of this. Look, you can't control the market's emotional swings, and you're definitely not going to eliminate fear and greed from human nature. But by understanding them, by learning to recognize their signature moves in the headlines, and, most importantly, in yourself, you can start to insulate your decisions from their powerful, irrational pull.
So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Now that you know the architects, who's actually building your financial future? Are you letting these primal, emotional forces of fear and greed call the shots? Or are you taking control, armed with this awareness, to build your future on a solid foundation of reason and patience? The choice, as they say, is yours.